Hey folks, how's it hanging? It's been long, hasn't it? Well, today we're going to be having a look at what little Miss Riley Dennis has been up to. I hear she's been spouting some insane nonsense since I've been gone, so let's see it.
Would you date someone who's trans?
Now, Ruben, you know that's a loaded question.
Would you date someone who's black?
Now, Ruben, you know that's a loaded question.
Would you date someone who's fat?
Paint me like one of your French boys! Paint me!
Okay, I'm sorry. John is my spirit animal. Let's move on.
Honestly, I don't know what your answer is to those questions, but I've met a surprising number of people who would say no to all or at least some of them.
Hey, to each their own. I mean, you know what they say, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. You know what I'm talking about?
Their argument is that it's just a preference and that you can't control who you're attracted to.
Their argument? No, Riley, that's just how that works. I mean, some people are attracted to certain things. I mean, okay, you know what? You didn't get that the first time. Let me explain this to you in a way you'll understand.
You love eating apples and bananas. So imagine you're eating an apple. While you're eating that apple, do you still love bananas?
I think most of the time that this is brought up, it's in regards to race.
Well, yes, race does overwhelmingly dictate physical features, which is the first thing you're typically attracted to, so it only makes sense it would come up the most.
But in this video, I want to talk about our other biases. Let's start with trans people. Would you date a trans person, honestly?
Ooh, Riley, you're laying it on awful strong there, ain't you?
Think about it for a second. Okay, got your answer?
No.
Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory.
You know what, Riley? You make a good point. That is discriminatory. But let me ask you a question. Would you date this man? How about this woman? Now keep in mind, if you said no, then that is very discriminatory.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you're a horrible person who hates trans people. There was probably a time in my life when I said I wouldn't date a trans person. But since then, I've thought critically about it and changed my mind.
Well, you know what, Riley? I am glad that you've had the opportunity to sit down and have the introspection needed to figure out whether or not you could really date a trans person or anybody for that matter. And I'm positive that Maria is happy about that too. Now, she's a great person, and I am sure that there are very, very many qualities you would enjoy about her. So why don't we set you two up for a date? That sounds great, doesn't it?
I could sit here and show you photos of conventionally attractive trans people. There are definitely trans people who you would never know are trans unless they told you, because they pass for cis. And that might convince some of you.
Wait, shit, why didn't you lead with that? Fuck, is it too late to change my answer? I will take whatever she is serving up.
But I think arguing that you would only like a trans person if you didn't know they were trans is a poor argument. I think you could be attracted to any trans person, whether they pass or not.
Well, that's a really weird thing to think. I mean, it wouldn't matter if she suddenly started passing one day or not. I'm never going to be attracted to this person.
I think the main concern that people have in regards to dating a trans person is that they won't have the genitals that they expect.
Okay, Riley, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and assume that you're some kind of demisexual and expect that you have no need for any sort of sexual fulfillment, okay? Actually, that would explain a lot of things about you, so let's go with that. Everyone else, however, has dreams. They have sexual fantasies that need to be fulfilled in some way. And those sexual fantasies of theirs can only be achieved with some particular configuration of the human body. For some people, it's a conventionally attractive woman with breasts and a vagina. For some people, it's a very tomboyish woman with breasts and a vagina. And for some people, it's this conventionally attractive man who happens to have a vagina. That's just how they are. They're not going to be attracted by much else. And listen, I know this is a difficult concept for you, but not everyone is capable of being pansexual.
Because we associate penises with men and vaginas with women, some people think they could never date a trans man with a vagina or a trans woman with a penis. But I think that people are more than their genitals. I think that you could feel attraction to someone without knowing what's between their legs.
Of course you can, you fucking moron. The problem is that a healthy relationship generally requires sex. And if sex can't happen naturally between two people, it kind of doesn't work the majority of the time. Look, something tells me that this boy, yes, this is a boy, and this guy will not get along very well together regardless of how much they like each other platonically. It's just simply not going to work in the bedroom department, okay?
And if you were to say that you're only attracted to people with vaginas or people with penises, it really feels like you're reducing people just to their genitals. You're kind of objectifying them.
Yeah, that would be true if you left out the people part, the people with part. Because newsflash, Riley, sexual attraction is part of being attracted to somebody.
Anyway, my point is...
Completely moronic, but please do continue.
We have implicit biases that we were raised with or that we developed over time, and they can be hard to get rid of.
Well, you heard it here, folks. The things you are sexually attracted to are implicit biases, and they can be unlearned or will be forcibly unlearned if you refuse to capitulate to the social justice narrative. As said by Riley Dennis.
I think this can be especially prominent within the queer community.
What?
Gay men often pride themselves on being disgusted by vaginas, and the same goes for lesbian women with penises.
Okay, no, I'm not even going to let you get away with having said that. I have met plenty of people in my lifetime, both gay and straight, men and women. The only ones who have a particularly strong aversion to the genitals of the opposite sex are people who've had a negative experience with them in the past, be it just something like a particularly bad sexual experience with a partner of the opposite gender, or maybe they were raped by someone of the opposite sex when they were younger. That's typically the only time people tend to be disgusted by genitals of the opposite sex. And I don't mean for that to sound quite so casual, but this is just the information that I've received from interacting with other people. Aside from that, most gay and lesbian people I've interacted with have either just been unimpressed or turned off by genitals of the opposite sex, much in the same way that a straight guy might just be unimpressed by seeing another guy's dick or just simply not want to look at it.
It's difficult because some queer people have built their sexual identities on these repulsions.
What the actual fuck are you talking about? Why are you in this video suggesting that gay and lesbian people are just people who hate genitals of the opposite sex? What the fuck is wrong with you?
But I don't think they're innate at all. If you met someone who was extremely attractive, had a great personality, but didn't have the genitals that you wanted, you might be surprised to find that it isn't a deal breaker.
Okay, you know what? I'm done with this video. The more I listen to you spout this dumb bullshit, the more it sounds like you got turned down by some lesbian chick who doesn't like the idea of having a girlfriend who has a dick, so now you're trying to Jedi your way into making her like you. Please tell me that whatever else you've been talking about hasn't been this fucking retarded.
In 2014, Laverne Cox said that misgendering trans people is an act of violence.
No.
Since then, she has repeated this statement multiple times, but some people still don't want to believe it.
I'm going to need you to explain this one.
So I thought I'd explain why intentionally misgendering trans people is an act of violence and why you shouldn't do it.
Okay, if you think that misgendering someone is an act of violence, intentional or not, you are a fucking moron. But don't let that stop you. Please continue.
You can misgender cis people or trans people, but it's particularly dehumanizing when done to trans people.
Okay, I am perfectly willing to accept that someone who has issues with gender might find it dehumanizing to be misgendered. But by what metric are you classifying this as violence?
Violence is a harder thing to define. Several dictionaries say that it involves the use of physical force, including the Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries.
Yes, because the commonly accepted definition of violence is an action involving physical force of some nature. But of course, I'm sure the dictionary must be wrong about this one thing because something something descriptive, something something proscriptive. Am I right?
Dictionaries are not intended as all-knowing, unchangeable rulebooks. They change and adapt over time as our usage changes. They are almost always descriptive rather than prescriptive nowadays.
Nailed it.
I would argue that their definition of violence is outdated and doesn't encompass all of the forms of violence we recognize today.
Okay, but Riley, the only forms of violence that we today recognize is something involving force of some type. A storm can be violent, a movie can be violent, your language could potentially be violent, but misgendering a trans person doesn't meet the classification of violent language, let alone violence full stop. Seriously, where are you getting this bullshit from?
The World Health Organization agrees with me. In their 2002 World Report on Violence and Health, the WHO defined violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation.
Okay, Riley, as contentious as I find the World Health Organization, even their definition of violence doesn't agree with you. I don't even understand how you think it does. Even if I were to look you square in your eyes and say your name is Justin Dennis and you are a man, I don't have any power over you, and that's not physical force. That's definitely not physical force. And it isn't even a threat. So by their own definition, that's not violence. That's just me being a dick.
This definition is purposefully broad. The WHO recognizes in their report that violence is culturally influenced and varies widely across the globe. What some people see as violence, others may not. However, in an effort to fight violence worldwide, this is the definition that the WHO came up with, and it explicitly includes non-physical forms of violence.
Yes, you are absolutely correct about that. However, their non-physical forms of violence require some kind of power.
They say physical force or power, and they note that power isn't necessarily physical. It includes all types of societal power imbalances,
which your average person has no more of than your average trans person.
Plus, their definition states that violence doesn't have to result in physical injury or death. Instead, it can result in psychological harm.
Sure, but answer me this. What, aside from everyone agreeing with you, doesn't cause psychological harm to special snowflakes like you? And if everything's triggering, everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything's homophobic, transphobic, whatever, at what point does the buck stop with you?
Given that this is the definition that experts on the topic of violence have come up with, I would argue that it's a much better and more effective definition than the one currently listed in most dictionaries.
Since when is the World Health Organization the experts on violence? You just pulled that out of your ass. What the fuck?
Therefore, violence does include psychological violence, and misgendering a trans person is absolutely an act of psychological violence.
No, it isn't. That's not even psychological abuse. But hey, call me a cynic. I get the strangest feeling that the entire point of this video was to say something so outrageous that you could go back to something less outrageous and have people accept it as true. Now, if I didn't know any better, I would say that the next thing you're going to do is try to say that misgendering a trans person is psychological abuse. But you wouldn't do that, would you?
If you still, for some reason, have a problem calling it violence, then call it aggression or abuse or whatever you want.
You disingenuous piece of shit.
The point is, it's a bad thing that we shouldn't do.
Okay, now this is the first non-insane thing you've said in the past 2 videos. Yeah, it's bad, it's rude, you shouldn't do it. Which is why I personally have refrained from misgendering Riley, not that I wanted to anyways. But if for some reason you yourself want to be a dick to these kinds of people, there are far better things to do it about. Don't do it about their gender.
Ask any trans person and they can tell you how awful being misgendered makes them feel. It's a way of invalidating their identity. It makes them feel disrespected, isolated, uncomfortable, and hated simply because of their gender.
Look, this is gonna sound harsh, but you don't have the right to be respected. You don't have the right to feel comfortable. And if you're going to give someone else the power to make you feel isolated simply by not calling you the right gender, that's your problem, not anyone else's.
And not only that, but it contributes to physical harm too.
Call me a skeptic, but I'm going to need you to quantify that statement.
Lots of factors contribute to the extraordinarily high rates of suicide among transgender people, but misgendering is definitely one of them.
When you say things like this, you are really not helping with the argument against people who say that all trans folk are crazy. You understand that, right?
According to the 2014 National Transgender Discrimination Survey, 4.6% of the US population reported that they have attempted suicide at some point in their life, while that number was about 41% for trans people.
Hey, and do you know what doesn't help that number? Spreading around the idea that trans people should give a good goddamn what people think about them. Hey, I'm just saying.
However, studies show that having a supportive family, like people who don't misgender you, can greatly reduce that rate.
Wow. This is a whole new level of retardation. This is advanced retardation. I don't even know what to say to this. This is so impossibly stupid.
The 2015 US transgender study found that the rate of suicide attempts for trans people with unsupported families was 54%.
This is your brain.
While it was 37% for those with supported families.
This is your brain on drugs.
Plus, misgendering contributes to a culture where violence against trans people is terrifyingly prevalent.
How? What's the correlation? Where? What the fuck?
A 2013 study by the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs found that trans people, and particularly trans women of color, were murdered at much higher rates than other LGBT+ people.
Are we still talking about misgendering trans people? Did you lose the plot? Did I lose the plot? Someone here has lost the plot.
Misgendering may not cause someone to go out and murder a trans person.
Then why would you present that information as though it does? The only purpose of that was to poison the well. You are a disingenuous piece of shit, and now I understand why everyone doesn't like you. When you say things like this, when you make videos like this, it doesn't make people accept trans people more. It doesn't do anything for the positive image of trans people. In fact, the only thing it does do is
contribute to a culture in which hating and disrespecting trans people is the norm.
You could make videos where you just educate people on what it means to be trans and why they should see transitioning as legitimate, but instead you make this nonsense to push your propaganda with little to no consideration for who you harm in the process. And it's sickening that you can do this with little to no self-awareness. Anyways, Riley, we'll come back to you in the future, but for the moment, I can't stand to look at you for any longer than it's going to take me to edit this video. Oh, and on that note, could you possibly not wear the exact same thing in literally every video of yours? Do you even watch that thing? Hey folks, sorry for the long absence. Real life decided to hit me like a ton of bricks, but I'm back now. The goal for the future is to upload videos on a weekly to semi-weekly basis, but that can be sped up or slowed down depending on what's going on, so be sure to click on the notification bar beneath this video to make sure you get your regular updates.